everybody. Welcome to Mormonish. I'm Rebecca.
And I'm Landon.
And we have a wonderful human being on with us today. We have the amazing Kyle Bishop. How are you, Kyle?
I'm doing so great. I'm so happy for this conversation. I am excited about it.
We are too. So we had sort of heard of Kyle before. We knew that he was this major influence in the post-Mormon world. And then when we went to an event for Bill Reel in Alpine, it was an in-person event, kind of a Q&A and a dinner. We were introduced by, was it Gene, Landon?
Yeah, it
I
was
think
Gene.
it
Gene.
was Gene
Yeah.
Judson, our friend. Everybody knows Gene.
Good
Gene,
old
you're
Gene.
amazing. Good old. I'm telling you, if you want something promoted, Gene is your man. He's amazing. We're waiting for him to start his own podcast, and then we can all get behind it. So, because he's incredible. But he said, "Hey, you guys, you need to meet Kyle. You need to meet Kyle in person and talk about doing an episode." So he took us over, introduced us, and we talked for quite a while. It was a really awesome conversation, and we're like, "Oh, this guy's amazing." And he basically, we'll let him. Why don't we let Landon read his quick bio, and then we'll just dive in with our friend Kyle.
Sure. Today's guest is Kyle Bishop. He left the Mormon Church in 2018 and now spends his time coaching his clients through the process of religious deconstruction. His brand is Beyond God and Religion, and he can be found under that name on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube.
There it is. That's right. He's figured out TikTok. Our
Yes.
viewers know that Landon and I have not been able to figure out TikTok.
And
So
he's
we are
found
not on that
TikTok in a
platform.
big way, not just found it, he's found it in a big way. Yes.
That's right. He's wildly popular. That's right. So welcome. We're so excited to have you here. And why don't you tell us a little bit about where you're sitting right now? That's an important wall, as we understand it.
So this wall is under construction. So
Look
this
at
is
that.
yeah, anyone who well, almost everybody knows the fantastic Kara Burrell, who is Nuance Ho.
Yeah.
I have commandeered the basement. So this is where I am at currently, and it has been
Wow.
the funnest move I've ever had, and it's been so fun. So this has been like
So
my dream move, and yeah.
that's like the Holy of Holies on the other side of the wall there.
It is. It is.
Kara's
The Dark Lord
located.
visits us daily. It's fantastic. All of the evil demon spirits are
That's
our
right.
truest
Yeah,
homies. It's
I
perfect.
feel like in the neighborhood, your house has like steam rising out
Yeah.
of the roof, right? And nobody knows why. There's
Just an
something
evil
happening
glow,
there.
just a purple hue to everything at night, especially. It's
The
pretty
only
great.
house that gets hit
Oh
by
my goodness.
lightning
Yeah.
consistently.
That's right. That's
That,
right. But we're easy to find. So
that's it. Just drive down the street. There they are. Well, that
yeah.
sounds really fun. That sounds you. I bet you guys have a lot of fun over there. That is awesome. So, well, we're really happy that you are going to be able to talk to us today about. We're going to delve into just kind of your background and your growing up, and then this amazing organization that you started, Beyond God and Religion, that is helping so many people. I was just talking right before we hit the record button about. I started kind of brushing up on a lot of your shorts and your videos. I was sipping tea out on my back porch, and just the affirmation in your videos and things that you put out, just the positive message and the wonderful tools, even in the few that I watched, I'm just like, this is incredible. This is what we all need. Just a calming, reassuring voice that it's going to be okay and you're on the right path. And I just love that about what you're doing. It's just wonderful.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, it's perfect. So why don't we start out by you just telling us a little bit like where you grew up or family or any of that and how you arrived at the point you are right now.
Yeah.
Isn't that always the big question, right?
Yeah. What happened to you? Well,
Yeah,
lots of
how did
things.
you get here?
Yeah, I grew up, so I was born in California. Elementary school was in Orem, Utah. Middle school was in Minnesota. Very cold. Do not recommend. And then I came back to Utah, Bountiful area for high school, and my family's been here ever since. And so I served a mission in Taiwan. So that was conflicting feelings about it after the fact, but I got to learn Chinese, which was really cool, which actually changed the way that I sound for forever. I like last night I was at a party and it never fails. Somebody always asks me like, "Where's your accent from?" And I get Scotland, New Zealand, UK, British guy trying to learn English, or German guy trying to learn English. So it's because I learned Chinese and didn't happen to anyone else but me, but it's permanent. So it's not an accent. So I think by default it's a speech impediment. So
Oh
yeah.
my goodness, that is really fascinating. So prior to serving your mission and learning to speak Chinese, you sounded like any other Mormon kid, maybe having
Yep,
had your
sounded
couple of
very
years in
Utah.
Orem, had the Utah accent, which we all
Yep.
have now. So, wow, that is
Yeah.
so interesting. Landon, he served in Indiana. Did you find that you picked up any Indiana twang or something that stuck with you?
I didn't. Maybe a little buckshot is all you pick up in Indiana, and they chase you off the porch.
Little
I get
They don't
that.
souvenirs.
talk to you long enough to pick up the accent.
Oh, okay. They're just like, you get the hell out of my property. Yeah, I understand that. I get it. But so, can you still speak Chinese? That's incredible. I mean, what
Mhm.
an incredible skill, especially given the current climate today, right? That's amazing.
Yeah, I came back from the mission and I majored in it because I still had no idea what I wanted to do with my life at that point. So I was like,
Right.
well, whatever I do, I'll just do in Chinese, which has not panned out. But
That's
it's
amazing.
it really comes in clutch when I'm like in the Costco line and people who don't speak or don't speak English need a translator, and then I just pop up and they never ever expect that a white boy is going to speak Chinese in Utah, and so it's
Never.
always just fun to just watch them because sometimes you'll like speak Chinese to them and they'll just look at you and just say nothing for a minute, and then
Yeah.
it's like it registers that like this white person is speaking Chinese to them. So it's, as far as foreign languages go, it's a really fun one to know. So
Yeah, it's very
Yeah.
surprising. I mean, I can see that in Costco. Can anyone speak Chinese? It's a
yeah.
desperate situation. You know, it's like being on a plane. Is anyone a pilot, or is there a doctor in the house? But can anyone speak Chinese? That is absolutely, that is so fascinating.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's a fun one.
That is amazing. Yeah, my goodness. So 2 years in Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy.
Yep.
Absolutely crazy.
Yeah, I came back, and to get back to the question you asked me, what happened to you? I came back and just I was at BYU. I like my whole life was just very cliche. Like if someone just knew that I'm from Utah, they could have been like, "Are you Mormon?" Yes. Did you serve a mission? Yes. Did you go to BYU? Yes. So, and this is where kind of things changed a lot for me. So I graduated BYU and still had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I got my degree in Mandarin, which like worthless in Utah unless you want to just like stand in a courtroom and be a translator, which I was like hard pass. But so I eventually moved out to Sacramento to live with my aunt and uncle because they were doing real estate and they were doing very well. And I was like, well, Bay Area, Chinese people, real estate, interested. So I
Mm.
just loaded up the old Honda and moved out there. And while I was there, I met a girl, and she was actually the beginning piece of my deconstruction.
It's
I
always
was
a
I was one of
girl.
those lucky guys that I got the I went to the temple and God told me that you are not the one for me. And I couldn't understand that because it was like the most healthy, blissful relationship that I had ever been in. And so that was like the first thread. It's like I couldn't get behind this idea that all this evil is happening in the world around us, just unspeakable acts of evil, even against children, and God remains safely, in the shadows. And then, I wanted to date this person, and then God jumps out of the bushes and blows his whistle, and it's like, absolutely not. This is too much. And I just could not make that make sense. And that was the beginning idea of there's something wrong here. And so anyway, and then I moved back and just kind of slowly deconstructed. And I mean, I deconstructed in just a really silly way because looking back, I just started like still wanted to be in. I didn't want to have to take on kind of the life upheaval that happens when you leave and you're public. And so I just kind of imploded instead of exploded for a long time. And so I stopped wearing like the top garment, which you're not supposed to separate those. And I was like, well, God's kind of weird in the way that he does justice, clearly. So I was like, that's not a big deal. And it's hot outside because it's Utah and it's a desert. So you know what? He can kind of just deal with that. And one thing led to another, and eventually it all came to a head when I was on a ski trip in Banff, Canada, with a really dear friend of mine and one of her other friends. And it was a lot of stuff had been coming up in my brain that I just wasn't really able to address. And so I think I was just unconsciously repressing it, back down into the depths of my subconscious mind. And on this particular ski trip, this was like January 2019. So this is I left. I knew I wasn't Mormon anymore, but this is when I realized I don't believe in God. And it wasn't a choice that I consciously made, because you don't choose your beliefs, right? Like you can't choose to be convinced by something that you're not convinced by. You can't choose to just look at the world around you and just, come to a conclusion that just makes no sense given what information you have access to. So, and vice versa. So anyway, like 2 a.m., I wake up and my brain is just racing in a way that I'd never experienced that level of like speed in the thoughts that I was going through. And it was the first time in my life that my brain was arguing against the existence of God. And everything, like I like all the arguments that I used to make as a believer, knowing that they were problematic and knowing that there were some issues which I could always plug the holes with a little bit more faith, just the magic wand of and more faith, because that's what we're supposed to do, because we're not supposed to know the answers, and God's ways are higher than our ways, and we're so stupid and puny, and all of that. And it was the first time, it was a complete mental collapse of everything that I believed. So it was just, my belief system was nuked, and
Did
I didn't have anything
anything
to.
precipitate that, like on the trip, or it just
Nope,
randomly happened? There was
completely.
nothing. Okay.
It
Okay.
was
Your
just the
brain just said
culmination
it's
of a lot
time
of.
to go there.
Yeah, it was a subconscious buildup. Yeah, and when
Yeah.
I was awake, I thought it was interesting that it happened while I was asleep, because when I was awake I was in my conscious mind, and I could push things down, and I could choose to not look at things, I could choose to think about something else. But when I was asleep, it's my conscious or my subconscious mind, and everything that was bubbling down there is like, okay, conscious mind is not in play, let's make a run for it, and it broke through. And that's when all of the thoughts and just that complete dissolution of my belief system, which of course was not a choice. Like I was doing everything that I possibly could to not look at everything that I had learned. And quotes, I had started becoming a like training to be a life coach right as I had begun deconstructing. And so I had learned a lot of things that were very healthy and kind of helped me to understand unhealthy toxic dynamics. And then when I started to realize that, my relationship with this God, or my relationship with the church, or my church leaders, there was a lot of things that were just like, hmm. And so I think this is a pretty common like story, that when people learn more about mental health, they tend to start realizing there's something very wrong with their religion, whichever one it is, because virtually all religion is based fundamentally on some very toxic ideas. Like you are subservient to a god, period. That is it. Like that's the foundational thing. And if there's anything wrong, like it's your fault. It's not the belief system, it's not this god, you are always wrong. And so like right out the gate with all of these religions, and particularly the Abrahamic religions, you are to subjugate yourself and just assume that you should not trust your own thinking. That's been done for you by minds better and greater than yours will ever be. And yeah, so there's just this, you start out just gaslighting yourself, and oh well, I'm probably wrong, which is just such a terrible way to start life. And as most of us were indoctrinated as children into whatever religion we were indoctrinated into, um it can be it's just not a great place to start.
I was going to say that it doesn't surprise me that you deconstructed in your sleep, because for those of us that were Mormon, we learned most of it while we were asleep at church, is where we got indoctrinated. So
Good one, Landon. Yeah.
Nailed
she's
it.
coming back. No, that's fascinating, because yeah, it very much I agree with what you're saying, because I wanted it to be true. I worked so hard to find
Yeah,
it to be true. And every time I turned around, I was going, oh, this is doing the opposite.
yeah,
The more I want it to be true, the more I'm going and finding the other direction. So yeah, it's very
yeah.
much, I don't think that's unique.
Yeah, and I couldn't make sense of that one either. That was another big thing, is that as we look, God apparently created this universe, and it's all coded to his will. Like everything that is here, he programmed to be this way. And there's a lot of things that just not only didn't make sense, but were unethical. And you'd think that, being all knowing, all powerful, all loving, which is an impossible, you can't maintain all three of those at the same time. Um, and be the creator of, this existence and all of the inherent pain and suffering that's in it, that's not our fault, bone cancer in children, all these things, and all the evidence that God would have had to have left behind, that he's the author of, if he was the one who created it all denotes that there's no pattern, that there's nothing going on there, like evolution. It's like, why would he have left, dinosaur bones in there just to mess with us, which is why Christians have a hard time believing in dinosaur bones, because that completely debunks the whole Genesis story about it being, a 6,000-year-old-ish Earth. And it just didn't make sense to me that why would God leave behind this world where all the evidence points to he does not exist? And then only the certain few who still believe it anyway, he's like, you guys are coming to heaven with me. And everybody else is burning in a pit of eternal fire for forever, be it literal or metaphorical. Either way, I was just like, that's like, an intern, who didn't know what's going on, took control of the company and then created things. It's like, it just didn't make sense that, like, when the last stone fell for me, or the last beam, I guess, of my faith and my belief fell when I realized that from both a logical and a moral perspective, Christianity had nothing. That it couldn't win in either of those areas. That's when I was like, if there is a God, he has no right to tell anyone to do anything ever. You cannot create this world so full of suffering that isn't our fault and then blame the people that he created when he's the all-knowing one and we're the pond scum, the idiots who just need to have faith. Like, I was just like, this does not work. And any God who would force, such parameters on his creations is surely evil. But more than that, it's, the evidence isn't that there is an evil God, it's that there just isn't one. Yeah. When I see the universe, exactly. I don't see a universe that's trying to kill us. It's just completely oblivious to us.
Which makes a lot more sense than
absolutely.
That some all-knowing, loving God is creating all of this and allowing us to suffer and somehow saving us in the end because we were willing to suffer. It's like, what parent would say, "Oh, I'm going to create the most hideous childhood for my kid,
horrific environment,
so they can go through all this trauma and be really strong when they come out. That's my plan." No parent would come up with that plan.
No, typically parents love their children, and that's really there's not a whole lot of evidence pointing to there being a loving God. It's like, there's over 4,000 genetic illnesses. Really would have been quite easy to not code that into existence. Could have just been all-knowing God who's also all-powerful. He knows everything that's going to happen and is completely capable of steering the boat in a different direction and avoiding whatever he wants to avoid, and yet chose not to. It's like, okay. Then it's like, well, Kyle, we need a God who's going to, give us struggle and trials so that we can grow. It's like, that's what I'm going to do if I have kids. Like, I'm just going to chop off one of my kids' legs and just be like, I'm doing this because I love you, because you need to be humble.
For your own good.
It's just like, there's no way that the word narcissist does not perfectly describe this God. And there's just no way that you can rationally get around that. And there is no morally, defensible position you can take to suggest that there is a God who does this and yet is good. So I'm coming out swinging. We're just going straight to like, here's why there's no God.
No, that's the dilemma. But we talk about this kind of thing all the time. In fact, what is our phrase that we always say, Landon? God is a...
Yep, God's a dick.
God's a dick. We say that all the time, and I've always said that if everything's real and I get up to the judgment bar, and of course you're up there with, God and Jesus and Joseph Smith right there, the fact that he's sitting there, you can go, really, this guy? I mean, come on, seriously, But I feel like I would say, look at this environment you created, and you gave me a brain, a thinking brain. I'm a thinking woman. Did you not imagine that I would not do what I was supposed to do with my God-given brain? I did it, and I came to all the conclusions that that my brain led me to. So I stand by every single thing I did. And I'm sorry if I missed it. I'm sorry if I missed the Easter egg that only a few people who could completely close their eyes. Because I was very fascinated. I watched one of your videos, and you just touched on it a minute ago, where you talked about choosing to believe. And you gave a scenario there. I'm hearing that. I don't know if you are. I've noticed more and more different conference talks, different devotionals where they're saying it is a choice. You
Just
literally
choose to believe.
must choose. And I wonder if you could maybe talk a little bit about even what you said. Do you know what short I'm talking about? Where
I
you
think
said
so,
it,
about
or
the
just
Santa
about that
Claus.
concept. Yeah, Santa Claus and the husband and wife, just kind of that concept, because I think some people do feel, why can't you just choose? And other of us are going, how can you even think that's a possibility? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because I thought you explained it very well. If it's not that exact thing that you said, just your thoughts on it, because it's
Sure, yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah, well, the example that I used in that video that I recall was like, somebody walking upstairs and then catching their spouse cheating on them. And then it's like, well, I could avoid all this pain of realizing this, and we can just go back to normal without this realization that I'm being cheated on if I just choose to disbelieve what I just saw. It's like, can you do it? You can't. And also, it wouldn't be healthy to do so, because then you're just masking the truth from yourself, which is delusion, and it's self-imposed delusion. And that's something that as I've coached a lot of people, one of the parts that really gets them, that they had the hardest time with, is not that there were people who were lying and manipulating and deceiving them, but that they contributed to their own delusion. That it's like, we know that people do bad things, but when we are on the side of the people who would be doing bad things to us and we go along with it, it's self-betrayal burns so much hotter than betrayal from an external person, because it's like you were complicit in your own destruction, in your own manipulation, and you pay a heavy price, particularly if you're in a high demand religion, like Mormonism, where you give up so much of your money and your time and your identity in particular. Because like Mormonism, for example, down to your underwear controls you. And I mean, wow. And then when you
Pretty
realize
much
that,
ultimate control.
yeah. So when you start realizing all those times when you're like, nah, I'm not, that's just anti-Mormon literature, where a part of you is like, I should explore that. And then you choose to not explore, because then you never open your mind up to the information that would have changed your mind, or that could have made you take at least a more nuanced approach to religion. And then you can take at least what is an extremely toxic belief system and then make it even just one step healthier. But we're so afraid, and we're so conditioned to be afraid, and there's so much guilt and shame that keeps you there, that we're willing to give up so much of who we are in order to adhere to this clunky, barbaric system. Because for most of us, like, I don't think that believers are dumb. I think they're doing what they have to do to get love, and adherence to the belief system is the price you pay to get love. And that's love is the currency of life, and without it, no one wants to be alive. And so it's like, between death and just, this is really shitty, we'll take really shitty every time. And it's just coming to this realization that there is actually tons of people on this planet who are living without your God, without your religion, without your belief system, without all these commandments and rules, that are just living blissful, beautiful, loving, spiritual lives. And yeah, and spiritual is a word that can be triggering to a lot of people, especially,
Yes.
atheists like me, because they think, because that word has been so hijacked by religion, that it means that there must be some sort of a supernatural realm that we have to acknowledge in order to be spiritual. And that's one of the reasons why I really liked Sam Harris, because he's one of the people who lives a deeply spiritual life. And Buddhism is just a great source for, a lot of the things that meditation, psychedelics is another thing that, man, I was so impressed by, stories about burning bushes, in the Bible. Like, wow, that's crazy. It's like, take a psychedelic, that's a dime a dozen experience. So burning bushes, like, please don't bore me with that. It's like, you can have, and well, I'll just make a shameless plug. Psychedelics have been invaluable in my healing, and in just a lot of the people that I've talked to. And while, of course, we have to say, we don't encourage anybody to break any laws. And a lot of people go to Peru to do ayahuasca, and there's states that are also, ketamine treatments. A lot of although big pharma is fighting this because it is to their absolute detriment, that we can literally grow something out of the ground that does so much better than any drug they have without all these crazy side effects. And that, of course, is not great for their business. And so politically they're fighting that. But yeah, that's going to go the way of the dinosaur. And while I wouldn't recommend psychedelics to everyone, I would recommend everybody learn about them, because why not? Open the door so that you have more choices, so that you actually have more options for what your brain will believe. And one of the things that people can believe is that healing is possible for me. And a lot of people do not feel that way,
Right. No, I know
especially
that for
when
a
they're
fact.
yeah, when they're at the beginning of a religious deconstruction, where it's not fun. I mean, we went through
No.
insane amounts of pain and gaslighting, and dismissing our own thoughts and feelings in order to keep this thing true, which it never was to begin with. But perception is reality. We perceive it as real, and therefore it's real to us. And so it's hard to be talked out of something, because when I was LDS, and people brought up what was called anti-Mormon literature, which turns out is just literature. Like, that's all it is.
From the
uh
church's own sources
yeah, exactly, the church itself. It's
or
like, why is the
website.
church publishing all of this anti-Mormon literature? Like, that's wild.
What is this?
Like,
Gospel
this.
Topics essay. Yay.
Yeah. um yeah, it just lost my train of thought. But basically, there's so
Yeah.
much that we can learn and that we can heal from if we just open up our minds to new places. But
Right.
we were taught to be so afraid of new places that it's just we're terrified of going there, because we've been taught that if you leave, you will become an evil person, which is so
Yes.
obviously not true. And every non-believer who's living a life of goodness and compassion and empathy, is just clear proof that that is an absolutely nonsensical thing. And yet so many people have been conditioned in such a brutal, relentless way that despite the evidence that is clearly, just out there, just people who aren't believers living happy lives, it's like, nope, they must be just so miserable on
Yeah,
the
look
inside.
how
And
miserable they are. Well, I know, and
yeah,
and basically they're just living life. We were joking before about lightning bolts and things coming out of, Kara
yeah,
and Kyle's house, but that's not true. Everyone is going to have ups and downs, wonderful things, more difficult and challenging things. That's just life. There's no hidden force behind it. There's no
mm-hmm.
agenda behind it. You can't attribute anything to it. And to me, on the other side of Mormonism, I find that incredibly comforting, the randomness. I don't have to
Yeah,
look for a reason. I don't have to think, what did I do? Or what did someone in my family do? It's
yes,
completely random. And then you deal with it. And it just happened to have happened. And for me personally, I know that's not maybe true of everyone, but I find that randomness extraordinarily comforting, because then you can
mm-hmm.
just face whatever it is head on without any kind of hidden justification behind it or reasons, and there you just are. But I think it helps, like you were touching on, to understand how your brain works. It needs patterns, it needs to feel good, it's going to do anything to stop you from going to those places that are difficult. So nobody should blame themselves for not deconstructing sooner or for not seeing it. The smartest, in fact, I feel like I interviewed Michael Shermer, the conspiracy theorist
Yeah,
guy,
yeah,
debunker, and he explained that almost the smarter the person is, the better their brain is at gaslighting themselves.
uh-huh,
And I've talked about my parents before, who are PhD level scientists who are beyond ingrained. And, on the other side of it, I think, how did that happen? They're brilliant. The more brilliant you are, the more ways you can come up to just, and you're not consciously doing it. Your brain is doing it to you. So
You
yeah,
basically have a
it's
smarter lawyer arguing your case for you. The smarter you are, it's
in your
arguing
head.
for your
Yeah.
yep,
belief in your head. And the smarter you
Yep.
are, the more ideas you can come up with to convince yourself.
Yeah.
yeah,
So yeah, it's
It's like the
definitely.
emperor's new clothes, right? The little boy goes, he's full on naked, because he's
yeah,
just going to say what he sees. Everyone else is like, oh, no, no, that's the king. We must not, they understand everything. The kid's like, no, that's not real. That's not true, but a
yeah.
lot of us, we arrive there eventually, usually, but it's very difficult. No one should beat themselves up, especially at, like, say, my age, or Landon, who's a little younger. We're in our 50s when we arrive at it. And in other people that of that age group that we talk about, and I'm sure you have clients in that age group, there's this sense of, oh, my life would have been, if I only could have, there wouldn't be all this
Yeah,
collateral damage with kids and stuff like that. But you cannot live in that world. You just have to, and maybe talk a little bit about that. I'm sure your different clients, I'm sure you have different ages, and it hits people at different ages differently, how they reconstruct after deconstructing. I think you must see a lot of that.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. And that is one of the most heartbreaking parts of this, is that people, it's like the people who really took it seriously and obeyed all of the rules, no matter how silly they were, the people who really put a lot into this, they're the ones who are in the most pain when they realize it's not true, because they suffered so deeply and intensely for it and fought so much for what turned out to be an abusive system that was just cannibalizing them and destroying their identity and telling them they couldn't be this, the beautiful person that they could have been. And they had to, put on the Christian Mormon cookie cutter zombie mode, version of themselves that they had to become in order to get that love and get that approval and get the attaboys from the community. Because without that, then, you're just kind of cast out and you lose resources, you lose love. And it's so hard because, when it's your whole community, especially somebody who's, lived in Utah the majority of his life, it's like, like everybody loves California Mormons, or let me rephrase that. When you're Mormon, the California Mormons are so fun to be around because they don't take it that seriously, because they're so surrounded by nuanced ideas and just people aren't as wacko, I think is the medical term. So but I coached a guy who was like late 80s. And this guy, his story is kind of like the plot of 1984 by Orwell, about how you're watching this guy who realizes he's in this abusive system. He figures it out, but then the system wins him over in the end. And this person I am 99% sure, is not straight and is just, and it anyway. All of his faith, everything just kind of like came crashing down. Everything was fine for a long time. A lot of the abuse that he suffered, he like for 50 years he didn't think about it, and overnight, and he still doesn't know what it was that triggered it. Kind of like, I don't know exactly what it was that triggered my dissolution of belief, but overnight he couldn't drive a car, he couldn't leave the house, he couldn't be alone. Like, he was just completely mentally destroyed by this. And the pain of, embracing what all of this means was so much to him that he went back in, and found his solitude in Jesus, but still denied his sexuality, denied all of these things. And it's so sad to watch a person. And while I can be so empathetic that it's like, like when you just pull out the balance sheet and look at how much pain is, in front of you, if you accept the truth, like the pain can be expensive. The pain is almost always expensive, or the truth is almost always expensive. And because it requires a lot from you. And so he just, couldn't deal with it. And I try not to judge people's decisions, because it's like, I'm not 84 waking up to this. I woke up to this when in 2018. And so I still have so much of my life in front of me. And so I'm like, I'm going to really, drop all the stones that I have in my little stone purse here. I'm not going
And
to
when you're
judge this
84,
person for
you
what they
may
did.
not wake up to it the next day, and you've just spent an entire life
and that's it.
preparing for that. And now it's like, do I ride this out at this point? And I can absolutely understand that. Do I take the chance at this point because I'm not going to have the other life now. It's just
no
late.
But
So
I know people that are that age, and they say, even if I have 10 years. It reminds me of, I watched a documentary on the Heaven's Gate cult. That was that one in the 90s where they all put on their tennis shoes and they laid down, and a spaceship was supposed to take them, and they committed suicide. And I remember thinking, oh, that just must have been a bunch of crazy space people. No, this documentary showed me exactly what we're talking about. These were professionals, many of them scientists. These were intelligent people.
Yeah.
And there was one man, it was very poignant, just like you described. He left and he got an apartment and he got a girlfriend and he started living his life. But those beliefs, they were there. And eventually he went back. And there was a video that his girlfriend was shooting. This man was probably in his 40s, shooting of him as he is leaving. And she's like, okay, he's made the decision, and it's this very short, when he's packing up, he's like, I'm sorry. It's just what you described. The balance of pain. He went back, and 3 months later, he was one of the ones in, that had ended up ending everything. And I remember just watching that going, it's bigger than we think. The pull and just what our brains are doing to us, it's so much bigger than I think what we understand. You can't judge anyone for how they react to it or what they decide to do. It's just too big.
Yeah. And I also want to speak to the other side of that coin, because while there is that very tragic, 1984 ending for, for people, there's also a lot of people who are willing to pay the fine for the truth.
Mm-hmm.
They're willing to change things around. And what I've found to be helpful with people is that you really have, wherever you are, no matter what age you are, no matter what you've been through, there is so much relief in just letting go of the control and the, oh, I wish I would have done this. Because you can't go back and change what happened, but what you can do is rewrite the narrative of what was happening as it happened. So if, for example, somebody who's lived their whole life, they can't go back and wake up when they're 23, when they're now 84, and then not let the missionaries in. Can't do it. But what they can do is give just an abundance of empathy and love, and that version of themselves had a gaping hole in their life, or maybe just wanted to socialize, whatever it was. These are not bad intentions, and you just couldn't know what you couldn't have known. And to expect otherwise, it's like getting mad at people in the 1700s for not giving their loved ones who's choking the Heimlich maneuver. That sounds so silly, right? They didn't know what the Heimlich maneuver was. They couldn't have acted differently. And so to treat the older version of yourself with disdain and you're an idiot and I can't believe that I did this to me, my and they just kind of just beat on this older version of themselves. It's like there's nothing to be gained there. But what you do have right now is a beautiful day. That if you choose to spend the time in a beautiful state of mind, which can be challenging to get to, but can absolutely be done, then it doesn't matter, because one of the things I've realized is that if outside it is stormy and ugly weather, but inside your mind it's blue skies, rainbows, white sandy beaches, then it doesn't matter what's going on outside. But the inverse of that is also true. If it's a beautiful day out there, but it's stormy in your mind, all you're going to see is dark clouds. So really, it's not what happened to you. It's what lens are you looking at what happened to you through? And the lens is something that you have absolutely control over. Like you can absolutely change the lens. And it's hard to get there, like I mentioned before, but the one place that I find people find the most success is gratitude, which to me and that sounds so cliche and just so platitude-y, just find something that you're grateful for. Just ignore all the pain of your life for this past 80 years and, just, pretend that you're happy. That's not what I'm saying at all. It's just let go of the past, because if you don't, your past will kill the rest of your future, however long it is. And that you can be certain of. Because if you can't let that go, then that will be your reality for forever, when you could change what's going on up in your mind. And gratitude is the stepping stone to get there, because you can't psychologically just go from a bad state to a good state unless you use gratitude. Gratitude is like the bridge between those two states of mind. And gratitude is something that it's like, no matter how bad your day is, there's so many stories that we see on the news where, people are just murdered in the most senseless, stupid, cruel ways. And it's like, well, that's not me. I still have today. And you talk to people who are, at the end of their lives, and like terminal cancer patients. Whatever your worst day is, whatever how bad your day is going today, there's nothing they would not give to switch places with you. Like period. And so it's like just realizing that there is so much abundance. And it's like emotion.
Yeah, no, I know. It's so charged to talk about it. It absolutely is. No, and you see so much of it with the people that you coach. I mean, that you must have to do a lot of self-care as you work with people, because you hear it and you see it and you see the pain and you help, but you're still impacted. Yeah,
Yeah.
I do not blame you for just feeling that way. You feeling everything. So
Yeah. It's like
I'm sure
I
you're
see
doing
what
an amazing
works.
work.
I
Yeah,
see what works and I see what doesn't work. And I see it all the
yeah.
time. And so it's like, you do this for enough time and you'd have to be an idiot not to realize that there are certain patterns that bring out joy and bring out forgiveness and forgiveness for yourself. Just little things can change the game.
Do you find it productive? We were at a Thrive event. Was it 2 years ago, Landon? The one that was in Salt Lake, or 2 years ago, I think.
Yeah.
And Natasha Helfer Parker had us all do an exercise, and we all stood up, and she said, "You're here now. Look forward to your future. What do you see?" But then the important part was to turn around and talk to yourself in the past, and like what you said, and said, I understand why you did what you did, or why you didn't take action when you should have. I understand, and forgive, like you said, and come to terms with that. And I wonder, I find myself, when you talk about gratitude, trying to look at things from my past in the church that I actually can be grateful for, things that were okay, things that were positive. And there are things like that. I know some people don't want to hear that there were things that were okay, but growing up in the 80s in the church, it was a different day, and it was a wonderful time with friends and fun and activity, so I look at that and I think I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I am going to remember a lot of the positive things, and I'm not going to trick myself into saying they weren't positive. Even with my knowledge now, there are things that I see that are okay. So is that a healthy thing to do, or should I be more realistic? I try to just, piece out the things that, I enjoyed that time, or when I directed that road show, I loved those kids. I pull those things out and I try to hold on to those. And it's mostly about relationships and things like that, and people. So that helps me.
Yeah. If there was nothing, valuable to people, they wouldn't be attending. And so that suggests that there is some, value there. And when you don't give the devil his due, so to speak, then you kind of do so at the lack of your own integrity. Because if you're just painting it as this completely evil thing, first of all, nobody will believe you, because no one on this planet has had that experience. Not even you, not even the person claiming that it was just all bad. It was all bad. It's like how they taught us about Satan at church. It's like, well, Satan, of course, would be doing, donations, and he'd be doing raffles and giving away free things. And, it's like, yeah, he would be.
That sounds fun. That sounds fun.
Having a lottery.
Yeah. It's like you have to look. Yeah, you have to give all the points where it's due. And the cool thing is that you can separate. And this is a double-edged sword when we do this, because this can be toxic or this can be beneficial depending on how you do it. But you can separate the membership from the church, from the teaching and the institution of the church, because the church is a place where people come to serve in a lot of situations. And of course, the church loves to take credit for that. It's all these people donating their hard-earned money to the church, and then the church gives away a tiny bit of it and says, "Look at how good we are. Man, we didn't have to give this away, and we totally did." It's like, well, you told your membership you would, and so you'd think that if you had a shred of integrity, you would do that. But it's like they think that's extra credit. But with people and separating it, it's like there's so many good people who are attracted to religion. It's just that religion takes that and manipulates the message into, we made these people this way. It's like, no, you didn't, because there's all these other people who don't believe in your faith who are also doing these things. And so to simply take credit for it, it's like, sure, you may have hosted the building, where all this took place. That would have been an empty building had good people not come and grace the halls of your wacky, messed up church. So
since the church is a business, isn't the church really, your participation in the church, a cost value evaluation that you have to make constantly? When you're white, you have young kids, you grew up in Utah, things work for you, everything goes great, and as long as it's happening, you don't do that cost value. You say, this is working for me, everything's going good, I am, like you said, getting something out of it. But then all of a sudden, when one of your kids turns out to be gay, or something else happens, and you start seeing this isn't working out in that cost value,
there's no place for me now.
You're now saying, now it's costing me more than I'm gaining. And isn't that what we're all doing all the time, is constantly making that cost value evaluation? Is, am I getting out of it? And you're willing to overlook things if you're getting the value out of it.
That's true.
But then once you get to that point where you say, this is costing me too much, it's hurting me too much, these truth claims not being true, I can't, it's causing me loss of sleep, I can't, and then all of a sudden the cost to stay in becomes too great, and we make that decision.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the main theme of what we're getting at here is that you just have to let go of what you can't control. You can't go back and control who you were and the decisions that you made, but what you can do is, just clean the slate and give yourself the gift of just being able to start over. And that's something you can do every day. You can do that every week. You can do that every minute. And one of the really cool things that I like to encourage people do in coaching is to give themselves permission to completely f it up. Go and try new things. And a lot of the things that you go and try, you're a kid again. All the questions that religion answered for you, and again, it controlled you down to your underwear, the entire spectrum of choosing, of just life the church dictated to you. And so all the periods at the end of all those sentences are now question marks, which can be very daunting, but it can also be very exciting. And so giving yourself the freedom to go out and not be like, oh, I'm going to be that person who, if I make any mistakes, then everybody in the church, all my Mormon friends are going to be like, see, we told you to stick to the rod and look at you now. They love to do that, which is endlessly frustrating, especially as they're like, we're God's chosen people. We're number one. I'm like, okay.
We can't be number two. No, that's really funny. We just went to brunch with the amazing Lila Tuller and her wonderful boyfriend, Adrian. We were just talking about perfection and how damaging that is. And the point of life is you got to fail and try and try. And if you haven't failed, you haven't tried. And I've tried a lot, right? That's what they say. It's from Ruben and Ed, a very funny movie, but Mormons don't have that sense. You got to get it right pretty quick. You've got to get it right or you're judged or you may be going to hell. So you never have that time period where you can just try and try. And I think that's post-Mormons. Now they're doing that, maybe on steroids, right? So that gives us that cliche. Oh, look at her. She started drinking. She got a tattoo. She's, but you're just trying, you're trying to figure things out. And in your experience, when you coach people, is that okay? Is it okay to just, like you said, clean the slate and then go from there?
Yeah. And it's kind of cool because a lot of people would describe their life when they hit the religious deconstruction phase and realize that, they've been wrong about this, is that they'll say, I wasted all of this time. And it's like, did you really? And they'll say, I'm starting my life over. It's like, well, the truth is you can't start your life over because all along the way, even before you realized that you were in a cult or in a high demand religion or whatever you want to call it, you were developing skills and learning things that can never be taken away from you. So there's no possible way that you can wipe your brain of all the good things that you learned, even though you were in a toxic environment, because a lot of our worst days are actually kind of our best days in disguise because they force us to develop skill sets that we would never have otherwise developed. And this goes back to the Bill Rill event that we met at. One of the questions at this Q&A was, if you could go back in time, would you have avoided the Mormon church? Would you change your story so that you didn't have a clue what Mormonism was? And Bill and a lot of other people, including myself, say absolutely not. And so it's empowering because to that 84-year-old person who feels that they've lost so much of their life, it's like you have learned so much and you get to, for however much time you have left, you get to have all those skill sets with you. And so once you just let go of the past and just focus on now, don't focus on what you don't want, I wish that I hadn't have done this thing in the past, but instead focus on what you do want now. The world is yours. Your life is yours again. And at that point, there's no longer a high demand religion you can really blame because they may have ruined your yesterday, but it is on you. You have control over your today. And that is completely your prerogative. And so it's wherever you are, be nice to yourself because that past version of yourself is the only way through which you got to be who you are today. And when people like Bill Reel, who just exhausted himself in researching all the insidious ways that this religion has destroyed people's lives, in its very subtle but carcinogenic way, he still wouldn't go back and change it. And that speaks volumes. It's like you can take your pain and, it's hard to be a motivational speaker if you didn't have a really, really rough go at some point in your life. I was making jokes with Kara the other day. I was like, I really should just go do hard drugs or something and really fuck up my life. Because man, that's going to come back later. And,
that's right.
Way higher speaking fees,
That's right. No, that's exactly it. You've got it down. What do you tell people about relationships? A lot of people that leave when they're my age or Landon's age, kids that are in, parents that are in, siblings that are, how do you, and I'm sure you deal with that with the people that you coach, because that's kind of a daily thing that kind of we all face. How do you tell people to navigate those different situations where people are they're disappointed with you, they don't understand you, you know? I mean, it is let me tell you, to be a parent and have your kids looking at you and going, I don't even know who you are. For one thing, I
Yeah.
say to them, call me when you're 50. I'll be
Yeah.
100, but call me when you're 50.
Yeah.
Because it's part of that. But I'm sure that you talk to people about that, and a lot of us are dealing with those
Yeah.
relationship issues.
Relationship issues takes up 90% of coaching for people who are
Oh,
religiously just deconstructing. So I'm more of a
yeah.
relationship coach than I am about
Oh,
because a lot of people see my TikToks and they assume that's kind of like what I talk about with a coaching client. The things I talk about on TikTok and wherever are almost never spoken about in our client calls, because it would be a lot easier for people to just leave if they didn't still have loved ones who were still in, and there's just that clash of life. But I do have kind of a four-step thing that I kind of realized. I created it because I tried to communicate with believers and it went so badly for so long that I was like, okay, what I'm doing is not working and I need a better approach to this. And so there's basically four steps. And this is what I tell a lot of my coaching clients. So number one, and this is for people who want to have a conversation about, this is who I am now. This is how I came here, because it's hard to have intimacy and true connection in a relationship when the other person refuses to look at your story, because your story is who you are. And if they don't want to look at who you are, what connection can possibly be built there? And that can be a heartbreaking thing to realize. But that's why this, four-step little thing is so useful, because it helps to bridge the gap. So what happens is that people want to talk about the church, not because they're trying to, bludgeon the believer who's still in, but because they still love that person and want to have that connection, because it's been so important to them for so long. And it's like, how can we save this? And it's, it goes off the rails when people, say, hey, I want to help you to come out. Here's a crazy Joseph Smith quote. Now defend yourself as to why you're still in, given that this quote, this crazy quote is here. And then the person instantly, it triggers the backfire effect. They go on the defensive and then they feel unsafe. The best thing you can do, in fact, the only thing you can really do, is to create an atmosphere that the other person who is still, in this toxic environment and doesn't realize it, feels safe. And that requires a few things of you as well. One is that you're not attached to whether or not at the end of that conversation, they're like, okay, sweet, I'm leaving. You're right. That's not going to happen. This is because remember, you're trying to logic them out of religion, out of this belief system, but they never logic themselves into. So you're using the wrong tool. Like, they faithed their way in. And so when you go at it that way, it can be, a really challenging thing and just backfire over and over, which was my experience. So anyway, let's get to the four steps. So number one, I read or I encountered information. That's kind of how it starts. And then you can kind of explain what it is. You share, the quote or whatever it is. But it's not about making that person be in the hot seat. What you do, and the kind of the utility in this approach, is that you're not saying, here's this thing and why are you still in it? It's, here's this thing, here's what I reflected. So you start with, I read. And you don't want to say I learned, because if you say I learned, it presupposes that what you read is true. That will trigger the person's brain. So that's just a quick caveat I want to throw in there. Not I learned, because you don't want to presuppose. You're trying to just say, hey, this is my experience, as opposed to, here's this thing. How could you still believe it, you moron? So I encountered, and then you go to I felt. Now, it's kind of like in Preach My Gospel, how in order to get missionaries to not engage with constant Bible bashing, they say it's a lot easier for you to share your experience than it is to go, Bible verse to Bible verse back and forth, because it just leads nowhere. And it's actually that same logic, but kind of like turning it on the church by saying, I'm going to just talk about, I read this thing. This is how I felt about that thing that I read. And then you go to I concluded. Based off of what I read and how I felt about it, I concluded that the truth was this. And then the most important part is step 4. Given what I've just explained, do you think there's a flaw in my logic? Like, help me see if I'm wrong here. So it is you on the hot seat. So what you're doing is you're enlisting that person in a non-threatening way to look at the thing that you looked at, which, that's a win right there. Even if all you did, like if somebody says, the church wasn't ever racist, and 10,000 racist quotes come to your mind and you want to just hurl them, instead you can say, well, here's something that, like, here's what my experience was. Here's how I got to where I am now. I read this quote, and then you share the quote. And I felt this way about that quote. And you talk about, kind of your inner struggle and where you were. And then I concluded that, the church must have been like racist. And we can talk about why, that's up in the air. But here's the conclusion that I came to based on what I just told you. Do you think where did I go off the rails? That is a very, very useful approach. And it just absolutely kicks the trash out of the other approach where you just, man, you are so dumb if you still believe this. And here's a quote. And this is really hard because like even I teach this and I still have a hard time with it because it's like the ego is still there and there's so much pain, and there's certain people you can have this conversation with and have it go well, and there's certain people like with parents who are still in that I struggle with. I'm like, man, like I hope no one caught that exchange on video because that would not be good for my brand. It's like but like, you're going to win some, you're going to lose some, and just be able to have the exchange. And however it goes, detach from the result. Don't tie yourself to needing things to go a certain way, because when you have expectations, you create, it's like kind of like you start this, the more expectations you have, the more opportunities you have to get angry and disappointed. And so what you do instead is basically the point is when you trade expectations for appreciation, the whole game changes. You're not tied to this person. It's like if your happiness is impacted by whether or not your loved one leaves the church, your happiness is not in your own hands. And not only is it not in your own hands, it's in the hands of somebody who is still in a high demand religion, who is not thinking for themselves. I think about my relationship with my parents, and like that's brutal. It's been so hard. But I look at my mom and I'm like, that's not really mom. Mindy, my mom's name is Mindy. I'm like, Mindy doesn't know who Mindy is. Mindy has completely taken on this mask, and I have so much empathy for her because she didn't choose this. She was indoctrinated as a child just like I was. And it's been a lot easier for me to get out because in all the years, she's been in for so much longer and has just kind of been hooked up to the IV drip machine of this indoctrination her entire life. I had it for a while, and it's become like society used to be so strict and now it's a lot less so. And so who knows if we switched places and I was her father and I was indoctrinating her with this, would I have been any different? And I would love to hope so. I would love to hope that if I was a German in the year 1940, that I would not have been a supporter of the Nazis. There's no evidence that really supports that fantasy. I probably would have. And that is like so hard. And I'm like, no. And my ego is like, that can't be true of me. But it's like, you just look at, you just look at the statistics of the time and it's like,
yeah,
you probably would have been that guy. And then we get into the shadow where it's like, if you don't really understand the evil that you're capable of, you don't understand yourself at all. But again, that's a little piece of information that we'd much rather go throughout our fun little day without having to ever face. And we have, there's this, and I'm going all over the map because ADHD is awesome. But on Netflix, there's this show called The Push. Have you ever seen it?
Oh, I've heard of that. No. Would you recommend that? I have heard of that.
It is so it's a good introduction to anybody who wants to get into Jungian psychology and particularly shadow work, which is something that I hit really heavy with my clients. So the push is basically a social experiment where what they're going to do is take people off the street. And then they're going to do a brief screening to see how suggestible their minds are. The objective is to get as many of these people to commit murder by the end of the day. And they have an extremely elaborate piece by piece psychologically backed, like if you're gonna have somebody do something crazy, you don't start with the crazy thing, you do these tiny little subtle things, and and then before they realize that they're too far and they're now culpable of this thing, and it all ends. It's called the push because the person they're supposed to kill is sitting on the roof on the ledge and they're bungeed up, but the person can't see that because they're coming from behind. They have to physically push him off the roof. And how many people do it will astound you. And it is and who they follow, lots of different people, and who you'd think would be the killer. You're kind of guessing whether or not this person that you're watching at this particular portion of the show is going to do it. And it's one of those things where like history repeats itself, not because we're stuck in some like that it's just bound to be that way, but because we refuse to believe that we could be one of the people who pushes someone off a roof, that is inside of you. And the more you refuse to acknowledge that, the more likely you are to create that self-fulfilling prophecy. Because how much development, how many how many hours a day do you spend solving a problem that you do not think exists? Zero. And so when you refuse to look in yourself and say, like if people, it's like imagine if every narcissist on the planet just started with the assumption that I'm probably a narcissist and then, went from that point, as opposed to I'm probably not a narcissist. Boom, done. You're not going anywhere. So until people can embrace that radical honesty of maybe I'm the asshole, like maybe I'm the person who has these narcissistic tendencies that I refuse, I cannot accept that that is me because I've been trying so hard to be good. So I must be good. Otherwise, my effort has been a waste. Silly, egoic driven ideas like that are really just there to maintain your level of safety, that sense of safety and security that like, I'm not a bad guy. But it's like when you just accept that maybe you are, you at least open the door to looking at yourself in a light that is honest. And yes, it will be painful. Yes, there will be tears, but you will finally be coming closer to a truth that you never would have found out about yourself. And then you can finally start addressing problems in yourself that were never going to be addressed ever. It's like, why do people go to therapy? Because other people in their lives refuse to go to therapy. It's like, don't be the guy who refuses to go to therapy. Don't be the girl who refuses to go to therapy. Assume you're fucked up because you are. You're fucked up.
Introspection is hard.
Yeah. But like, yeah,
Some people
yeah.
are
It's
like,
like,
I don't need to do this. I'll do it tomorrow. I'll get
yeah,
introspective tomorrow or the next day. I'm not going to do it now.
yeah. Kara dropped a bomb on me the other day. She told me, it's this quote, and I'm going to try to paraphrase it. Like, the amount of growth you will experience in this life is directly correlated with the amount of brutal truths you can accept about yourself.
Wow.
Like, that's it. If you're not willing to assume that you have this capacity for evil, you'll never work on not being evil. You just assume that's not me. And then all of a sudden, it's like, as people have researched, like when parents just snap and kill their kids, nobody ever saw that coming, you know? And if we assume that we have that in us, that we at least are aware of it and we can be more careful and see it coming, which gives us more time to say, oh, you know what, maybe that isn't me. And then we start working on things and developing skill sets. And it's like, imagine if we went to therapy before we needed it. Imagine how much we could prevent instead of having to cure. And all the, the days that wouldn't be wasted in just grieving and in anger and just meltdown mode. And
Meltdown mode.
of course, that idea can also be weaponized against somebody because some people, can tend to be too self-aware,
Right.
and they beat themselves
Yeah.
up over everything. And so, and this is really where nuance and being with a coach who can kind of understand where you're at and what you need. Because some days you need kind of a kick in the ass, and some days you just need a hug. And it can be hard to tell
Oh,
what you need,
that's true. Well, and
because
I
it's
also
like,
think that people in the church sometimes, and myself included, you're not taught to be very introspective because it's never you. It's Satan's voice, it's God's voice, it's the
yeah,
Holy Ghost's voice, it's what someone else wants. It's never you. You're basically
right.
trained to override your gut
Yep.
completely because it's
Bingo.
never you. So you never get in touch with who you are. And then on the other side of it, you realize there's no Satan, there's no God, there's no one telling me, it's just me. What do I do now? Who
Yeah.
am I in my head? I mean, do you ever feel that way, Landon? It's maybe you don't. I don't know. Landon's very pragmatic, but
No, absolutely. You often have to come back to that point of, who am I really? What am I, you know, how did I get here and what can I
yeah,
change? I
yeah.
think that's true for all of us. In
Yeah.
fact, I was thinking as we were talking, you had mentioned that we went to brunch this morning, but at the cash register, there was a little saying there, which went right along with what you just said. It basically said, there's only one day that you can change. You can't change yesterday. You can't change tomorrow. You can only change today. And so
Yeah.
There it
all of
is.
that change has to happen, whether you're 84, as we talked about, or what, you have to make the change today. And when you make some changes, things are going to change, and it's going to be very difficult to
Mhm.
realize who you are and where you are. And it's going to take a lot of days you can only change one day, but it's a constant change that you have to change each day. And you're eventually going to find that tomorrow you're a different person than you were yesterday. because of the change you made today. So I thought, as you were talking, that just kept coming into my head there.
Wow, it's meant to be. You're in
Yeah,
a vortex of
yeah, I
change. We're
know.
hearing it from all sides. This is awesome. So tell us, as we're kind of concluding here, tell us about your organization, your coaching, how people can reach you. Tell us anything like
Yeah.
that that you'd like everybody to know, because I'm just fascinated. It's just wonderful, everything that I've delved into online and everything you're about. So just tell us all about that.
Yeah, I would love to. So people can reach out to me on any platform. I do have a website. It's beyondgodandreligion.com. And there's a whole bunch of buttons as you scroll down that it's just book a free session. So I let people just book a free session. And the reason why I do that is because I genuinely love what I do. And so I'm okay with it not turning into a coaching relationship. And that's okay, because part of what I do, I actually learned this from my aunt who was in real estate, who she would have people who were always reaching out to her and asking her, what's the market doing? And she would work for free all the time. And people wouldn't end up booking her as like, as their agent. And she was okay with that. And I was like, well, why are you okay with that? It's like, well, because like I do get to help a lot of people. And then from time to time, I get a big payoff when somebody chooses me. And I wouldn't be able to find those people if I didn't offer something. And also, I found that a lot of people can have a complete mind shift and solve a lot of problems in one conversation. And then if they don't want to go, in like, book and do a thing, and they feel weird about like, oh, I didn't pay you and I got, this big benefit, donate to my Venmo. Like there's no charge for it, but people can always just be generous. And I love when people do that. So I'm not really worried about that with, the first session. I don't have a set time limit for people because I've had experiences when I've been in therapy where, it's like I'm talking about something that's really deep and meaningful and I'm really getting somewhere. And then it's like, and time, you want to keep going? That's 20 more bucks. And it's like, that is
Pay the
not
meter,
the,
pay the meter.
yeah. I also don't have anybody sign a contract. There's no signing of anything because I don't want it to be like people felt shackled in these religions. And I don't want them to come to me and then feel shackled to my coaching program. It's like, sorry, you know,
Yeah.
you chose to be baptized, you know?
That's
It's
right.
like,
You're never getting out. You signed up.
yeah. So
Too
yeah, and
triggering.
yeah, and yeah, that's basically it. I mean, so anybody who wants to just have a free session and just chat, beyondgodandreligion.com. So that's basically all the information there is about the coaching deal. And it's just per session. I do give like, bulk discounts if people want to purchase multiple sessions up front. Um, but yeah, so anybody who's interested can just reach out and yeah, I
But
love what I do. So it can make a big difference. One
if,
conversation can be very life
Yep.
changing. So
if
I,
that
Yep.
advice you just gave is indicative of the quality of coaching that you
Yeah.
do, I think that's says a lot because I think what you had just said about I read, uh,
Mm-hmm.
I read, I
I
understood
felt this
this,
way. Yeah.
felt, and I
yeah,
understood. Yeah, I concluded, boy, that alone to help talk to other people. When we got off with you on our pre-show, Rebecca and I both went, "Wow, that's a really powerful
Yeah.
tool right there."
yeah,
To be able to point it out that way because it is non-threatening, and it forces them rather than to argue with you, it forces them to internalize and say, "What would I do in that?" Present
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
that information that I can now tell this person what I think they should do. I first have to internalize that information into myself. So I thought that was a powerful tool and yeah, some very good advice.
Yeah, it's a subtle
Okay.
little shift in approach, but it makes such a big
Mm-hmm.
difference. And it's whenever you bring up something that can be very triggering to somebody, their brain naturally wants to fight you. And when you say, "Yes, please fight this idea with me," like let's figure out where I went off the rails, and not in a manipulative way, because it's like sometimes we do realize that sometimes you take a quote and then you make it to be too much. You stretch it a little bit too far, and then then their brain goes, "Ooh, you went off the rails there." So it can also be a way to genuinely refine the way that you are validating and invalidating and exploring information that has led you to come to your conclusion. Because you like I was saying before, you have to give the devil his due, and if they have a point and you don't give it, then you're not an integrous person in that moment, and that's going to trigger them and be like, you're just going to confirm what you don't want them to confirm about people who leave the church,
Right.
which is like, oh, see, you were disingenuous. And if you
Yeah.
were, It's like this is not about manipulation. This is not a tactic. It's a strategy where both people maximize the likelihood that that conversation will be integrous and that it will actually move somewhere. Because man, do I have like just a whole cemetery full of conversations that just did not go anywhere and just are never going to be revived. So I don't want to have
Wow.
less of those. So I
Exactly.
hope
And it's
that's
a
useful for
tool.
everybody.
No, it's extremely useful. And it's a tool that you just kind of put in your mind. And I mean, it's not a conversation you're not even planning to have, but you'll have that tool and you go, wait, I can rephrase it this way. And,
Yeah.
we're going to have a better outcome. It may not be a perfect outcome, but it's going to be a better outcome. And I think it's all about relationships, like you say, which is, like you said, 90% of your your coaching is talking about that. So wow. Well, this has just been, like I said, we talked to Kyle, of course, ahead of time a week or so ago, and Landon and I both like, oh my gosh, I feel so good. And now I feel so good now right now too. You're just wonderful. You just spread sunshine. That sounds really cliche, but you're just amazing to talk to. And
Thank you.
you're also on Instagram and TikTok. You can find Beyond God and Religion there, and we'll link all of his contact information in the show notes for this episode so that anybody can reach out to Kyle if they would like to, because I'm imagining a lot of people would like to continue this conversation and maybe talk to you about some of their own personal things they're going through. So again, we just like to say thank you. Thank you, Kyle. You're wonderful sitting there in Kara's basement in front of your wall. That's so fun. Just awesome. And we'd like to remind everybody to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell if you'd like to be made aware of when our episodes come out. And we finally did, believe it or not, figure out how, if anybody would like to help support the channel, because we appreciate you all so much. We have links to PayPal and Venmo in our show notes if you'd like to support us. We appreciate and love all of our viewers, and we also love all of our guests. So thank you again for Mormonish. We will sign off for now. Thanks, Kyle. Thanks, Landon. Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Mormonish. We really appreciate our listeners and would love to hear from you if you have a story you'd like to share. You can email us at mormonishpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and on our website, mormonishpodcast.org. And don't forget to look for us on YouTube and like and subscribe. Keep joyful, everybody.